Hello, this is Brian Jackson. Welcome everyone again to another episode of Wad Up. The whole purpose of this podcast is to teach everyone a little bit more about the law. It doesn't matter who you are. This is for you. And today we're talking about squirrels and the Fourth Amendment. But first of all, today is election day, and so just wanted to give a shout out on that. And in undergrad, I did journalism communication, and I was all about being an independent news source. So I don't plan to make this podcast political, and if I take shots, I'm fine taking shots at both sides of the aisle if needs be, if I talk politics. But just wanted to mention that, even though we may not agree on politics, it is great in the spirit of Thanksgiving that we do have the opportunity to vote. And sometimes as an attorney, when I'm advocating for a client and the other side, sometimes the other side doesn't, you kind of demonize them and, make them look evil and think that they don't have a good case and whatnot, or a good side to be on. But it's the advocacy system, and sometimes when you just step back and just look at the system as a whole, it's just good to be grateful that we have the chance to vote, period. So it's definitely a good thing. It's not a perfect system. It's still run by humans, but it's a very good system and compared to what we've had in the past. And so going into the Fourth Amendment, there was a case, there's stuff that's popped up in the news about a very popular social media creature, squirrel in New York, that officers came in and euthanized, as well as a raccoon. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, let's lay the groundwork and go a little bit over the Fourth Amendment, and then we can apply the Fourth Amendment to this scenario as a civil rights attorney, back and forth. And I'm going to take shots at both sides, the government and this guy. There's both issues arising on why this scenario came to be. But so first of all, Fourth Amendment, one of the most important parts in our Constitution that the framers honed in on, and one thing that the framers understood really well, especially with dealing with the king and him coming in and them just being a colony, was having individual rights. And a lot of that came from people as well who came before. John Locke was a philosopher back in the day, and after he died, his writings picked up a lot, as well as the Magna Carta. And then also a lot of just how politics started changing in England. And a lot of what we have in America is thanks to England. Things just didn't spring up in America. Ideas didn't come up. Either the UK was just a step behind us, or in a lot of things, the UK was actually 2 steps ahead of us. But just this notion of individual rights, giving rights to the people, and having this Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights covers the first parts of the Constitution. So you have the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Seventh through Eighth, that kind of focus on individuals and what they're protected from government intrusion. And so a big one was Fourth Amendment, and I think a big reason why, a big issue that was going on in the colonies was a lot of soldiers were coming in and just taking over people's homes without asking permission, going rifling through their houses without a warrant. But also, that stuff was happening in the UK as well. It also just wasn't an idea that sprung up out of nowhere. So we put in the Constitution that in order to search there cannot be unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant. So in order for the government to come in and search your home, they need a warrant outside. That's generally how the law works. There's some circumstances where they can come in, but without a warrant. But generally, you need a warrant to come into someone's home. So that's protecting our privacy, protecting government abuse in the system, and also putting a check on the government and just saying you have to have a reason to come into my house. So it doesn't mean the government can't not ever come into your house. They just have to have a reason. And so it says that a warrant has to have probable cause. So you have to have a warrant that has probable cause, and it has to be signed by a judge in order to come in and do a search. And so what probable cause is it's a evidence standard. And so you pretty much put something on the judge's desk and say, Judge, we have tips, we have information from credible sources, or we have found out that it's more likely than not that there is evidence of a crime in a home. And so a judge takes a look at it, and then if the judge says, yes, I think there's enough evidence to say that there is a likelihood of crime in a home, then you can sign off on it, and then they can go and execute that search warrant. So it's not just a warrant comes out of thin air. There's also scrutiny. There's also kind of a due process prior that has to be done. So if a police officer enters someone's home without a warrant, then that could be a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So that's not necessarily what happened in this circumstance, though. So going to the squirrel situation, and this kind of gets into animal law too. And I'm not an animal law expert, but it's not just the Fourth Amendment per se we're talking about here. We're talking about animal laws and state laws, because under the 10th Amendment, the state has police power as well to protect the health, safety of its citizens. And that kind of runs into animal laws and restrictions regarding animals. And a lot of that has to do with diseases and or harboring wild animals that could harm the safety of individuals. So here's the scenario. If you aren't already aware, this is what I've picked up. I was trying to see if I could get a copy of the warrant just so I can look at that and analyze it. Because also the scope of the warrant, there could be an issue with the warrant being too broad and because I don't know specifically what the warrant said and what it was looking for, or the officers going outside of what the warrant authorized. Because if there's something that says that, hey, we think that there's drugs in this house at this site or something specifically, and the warrant authorizes that, but they kind of go outside what the warrant asked for, if they go into the garage or anywhere else, that could be an overly broad warrant. But here it's an unknown what the warrant said. The only thing I can assume it said was there's 2 animals that are wild animals under New York law that aren't licensed and they were asking the judge to have them euthanized as a result. So let's get a little bit into New York law and animal law. And a lot of states have similar laws like this. It isn't like New York is brutal per se when it comes to animal laws. And I've gone through those a lot. A lot of people have asked me questions about what pets they can own and not own in certain states. And usually you have statutes that say stuff like you can't have like exotic pets like tigers, and the big cats and bears and those wild big mammals, and goes through a list of stuff. And specifically in New York, like it has like subsections like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and there's one specific letter section that specifically says squirrels. And so what the top of the statute says is you can't have these animals unless you're either part of a zoo or have some kind of temporary license. I think the statute also says, or if you're using it for education or something. So you have to have a license to have these certain kinds of animals. And also, I mean, every state essentially requires you to have your dog license. So it's just not out there. It's pretty norm that certain animals have to be licensed, and then there's also certain restrictions on animals that you can't not have as pets. And then it also mentions in there as well raccoons. So we kind of talk about the purpose of the law. We talked about the 10th Amendment police power, and so that ties into environmental police powers that the state has, and then also regulating the safety of humans police power. But then also it does say what pets are allowed under the New York statute, and some of it is hamsters, gerbils, other small fluffies. I can't remember specifically what they had. So I guess the issue is we have this small fluffy squirrel that's similar to a hamster that this family has fallen in love with. And there's kind of this ethical dilemma going on too on how this squirrel came about. From what I understand, the squirrel was lost its mother, and then the squirrel got hurt as well. They nursed it back to health, and then they let it go back in the wild, and then the squirrel lost its tail and just came back and claimed that it was pretty much domesticated at that point, and so they just kept the squirrel in. And then the squirrel became this amazing social media sensation. And I think they later started taking on other animals and creating some kind of safe house for animals as well. And so from what I understand, there was a lady, I think the Department of Commerce in New York claimed that they got several tips about the situation in the house, but I think somebody claimed that they went to the house and the squirrel bit them. And so if you look at the state of New York, there's kind of and I don't know if the state of New York, they probably had no idea that this squirrel was a social media sensation. But I mean, think about the state of New York, the situation they're in, and their police powers and their duties. Because, I mean, one issue is squirrels can harbor a lot of diseases. Even in southeast Idaho and northern parts of Utah and southwest part of Wyoming, there's ground squirrels that are harboring the bubonic plague still. And so there's concerns about squirrels harboring a lot of diseases, including rabies, as well as raccoons getting rabies as well. And so you have the state of New York, and they get this tip, and even if they knew if this squirrel was a social media sensation, like what were they supposed to do at that point? I mean, were they just supposed to say, hey, sorry, this squirrel is a social media sensation, it's not licensed, but we're going to let it go, we're not going to do anything about it? So their hands were kind of bind, because, I mean, if this squirrel did have rabies, and rabies shots are expensive, I mean, obviously this lady should have, I mean, if she had concerns about rabies, she probably should have gone right away to get a rabies shot and not, waited for the state to step in. But I mean, yeah, so they're in a catch-22. And so sounds like, from what I understand, they decided that they were going to euthanize the squirrel and raccoon on behalf of this lady to find out whether or not these animals had rabies. Because from what I understand, specifically for squirrels, I mean, you just can't take a quick test while they're still alive and determine whether or not they have rabies. You have to pretty much dissect them, and they have to be killed to figure out if they have rabies. So they balanced the life of a human and issues about any potential getting rabies by this squirrel and this squirrel and its life, and they decided, hey, we need to euthanize this raccoon and this squirrel. And I mean, if it wasn't a social media sensation, how big of a deal would it be? I mean, it would obviously still be a big deal for this couple and important to them because they got an emotional attachment to this squirrel, and so it was part of their life essentially, and so it's hard for them to see the squirrel girl go. But then also the issue though is how the government came in and executed this search warrant, because from what I've heard, I don't know the details, but I think from the owner of the squirrel, they indicated that it was a pretty crazy scenario. I think maybe there was around 15 officers came in, guns, made him sit outside of his home for 5 hours and made him sound like this crazy criminal drug dealer, and going around searching his home, asking questions really not related, like such as cameras, where the cameras, stuff like that. So I think he kind of had concerns that they were fishing for maybe something else. I don't know the details of the warrant. I don't know if they had tips thinking that there may have been some other crime here, and so but you know, if it was just based off a tip that, hey, there was a squirrel that bit me, someone has a pet squirrel at their house, and they said, okay, this squirrel needs to be euthanized, there's no license for this squirrel, and that should have been it. They should have just gone in, taken the squirrel, the raccoon, that should have been it. So there's concerns that maybe the search and how they went about it was a little too much. So there could be a Fourth Amendment violation as far as the breadth of it, if the judge didn't authorize them to do the types of search they did and the amount of time they spent on it, and if they were just going off some unknown hunches that maybe some other crimes were being committed, then there's potentially a Fourth Amendment issue there. But I mean, but also on its face, I mean, they had every right, because there was the suspicion of crime, because this guy didn't have a license to have a squirrel and or raccoon in his home. So, I mean, there's kind of two issues here. And I guess when I would say one thing I would say as it comes to animal laws is, if you are going to take on something that's not that you can't find at Petco, essentially. If you can't find an animal at Petco, or it's not a dog or a cat, then and it is more of an exotic animal, I would reach out to an attorney and ask attorney about your rights and what you need to do to take on this animal. Because, I mean, we all know about people that have taken on squirrels and birds that were hurt and tried to bring them back. I'm sure most of us have done that in our lives as young kids or as parents of kids. But also need to understand that there are legal rules when it comes to having animals and wild animals, and the need to have licenses for that, and especially, you know, if you're making money off this animal, if you're making a killing off your social media with this squirrel and that's the main source of income, then it's probably at some point important to lawyer up and say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm completely protected, that I'm okay with this squirrel, because yeah, in some scenarios, the I mean, if somebody has like a hurt robin or something and they're taking care of it, I mean, yeah, the city won't be as crazy and go all out on it. But if it becomes more of a business and a social media craze, and maybe that's part of the reason, maybe they knew it was a social media craze and that's why they took it more serious, then yeah, you better make sure that you have everything aligned to make sure that your squirrel is protected and that you're protected and that you're not running the risk of this legal loophole. And so yeah, so on the one hand, it is unfortunate that this happened. And again, yes, it is just a squirrel, and it stinks that this whole situation went down just because of a squirrel. But also, it just wasn't a squirrel. It was also a raccoon. He was harboring a raccoon. And I mean, I've known people who have had raccoons. I have gone to their homes and I've taken my children to see raccoons, and yes, it's technically not legal. You're not supposed to have raccoons in your home. So it's kind of this taboo thing on just nobody call the city or anything. Don't let the city show up. But also, I mean, I have kids at this home taking care, watching this raccoon, and raccoons are pretty big animals, especially domesticated ones. They're nice and fat. And I mean, they're almost the size of a dog. They're like a medium-sized dog. And so, I mean, if I'm at a home that with a friend who I don't know these people too well. It's friends of friends, and they just let us come in and see the raccoon. And this raccoon does something out of the ordinary, scratches, bites and draws blood on my kid, then yes, I'm calling animal control. I'm not going to give them a break on that, and I'm going to look out for my kid first. And I think that's kind of what the state of New York did too. Is said, okay, we're going to look out for our people first, then animals. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So, I mean, it was a valid Fourth Amendment warrant because they committed a crime. They didn't have a squirrel license. I think they claimed that they were going to get a license for education purposes for this squirrel, but they didn't have it. And you can say that, but you don't have it, and you've been making tens of thousands of dollars off this squirrel through social media. So go get a license for that squirrel before the city comes. If this is your source of income, make sure you're protected legally so this doesn't happen. Don't just skirt around the law, because I think there's a lot of laws that we think that, like I say, the Robin situation, maybe the city won't care as much, but it's still the law, and there's still a basis for the law. And if it's getting to the point where you're making money off this legal situation that is not legal, you got to make sure you're protected so your business will continue to grow, and that this won't happen, because essentially, the main star of your show is now gone. But also, on the other hand, with the city, shame on them for, should it have been like that? No, I think that probably you should have had some junior police officer or somebody from animal control who still had, police authority. And you could have had two guys, maybe one or two guys, come in and say, look, we got complaints. This is why we're executing the warrant. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to euthanize these animals because we had complaints about bites, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's probably how it should have happened. It should have been more low key. And so I think getting into politics, I think the funny thing about this is it is election day, and so both sides of the parties are grasping on to whatever to shoot at the other side. And so what I've seen is Republicans shaming the city of New York. And I think it's hilarious because on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans are somewhat hypocritical with their platform. And this is what I've always thought is hypocritical, is Republicans are always tough they're big. They want small government. Typically, they're focused on small government, and they want less government intrusion, less red tape, except for when it comes to crimes and criminal activity. That one, they're all about paying the police force, making sure the prosecutors are fed, making sure they have all the resources there, and beefing up that, and yeah. So that's somewhat hypocritical, because that, in a way, makes big government. And then also, what's funny is they're kind of protecting the squirrel, and a lot of Republicans are hunters and think they have rights to hunt, gun rights, and so they're kind of rushing to the side, kind of more of animal activists and PETA, and protection of animals and animal rights. And there's some very far left liberals that think that animals should have same or similar rights as humans, and they don't have the same rights as us. So it's kind of funny that they're going to the side there. And then also, yeah, the state of New York and Democrats typically are more about smaller government. And so it is interesting that that this was such a big deal. I mean, New York is a big city. There's lots of crime going on, but they thought to focus their time and resources on this scenario. Again, I don't know the background. But yeah, I mean, again, the question is, what was the big deal in going after this scenario? But I guess you never know. I mean, because if they did know it was a big business, could have thought there could have been some other stuff going on. But again, if you did, then you had to put it in the search warrant, and you needed probable cause. And so evidence for probable cause can include tips from individuals. So they did get tips from individuals saying that, hey, there's people in there that has a squirrel without a license. So that's it in a nutshell, literally, on the Fourth Amendment, and squirrels back and forth there. So yes, in summary, the warrant was probably valid under the Fourth Amendment because there was a crime committed. I don't know specifically what the warrant said. I don't know if it just said, go get the squirrel, go get the raccoon, euthanize them. Or if there was other stuff claiming, oh, we think there's some more stuff, or if it was just these officers gone rogue and they just had a hunch that, oh, well, maybe there's some more stuff going on in here. And so even though the warrant was valid, they could have been a Fourth Amendment violation going outside the scope of the purpose of the warrant and raiding the guy's entire house when they had already got the squirrel and the raccoon. I mean, maybe they could claim, well, we were still looking for more squirrels and raccoons. We didn't know if that was all the squirrels and raccoons. It could have been more squirrels and raccoons. So, I mean, I guess that would be their defense if there was a civil rights claim against the city. But yeah, as far as analyzing whether or not this is a good case to go after the city, I mean, there are some issues here. I mean, obviously it was a valid warrant. And so you got to tell your client, well, hey, they had a valid warrant here. And so they had right to come in here. And so it's kind of a harder case, even though the warrant was valid, then it's a back and forth on, okay, well then did you guys go beyond the scope of the warrant? And they would say, no, it took us 5 hours. You're just looking for a squirrel and a raccoon. And they would say, well, yes, because we don't know if there are more squirrels or raccoons. And so it just, and also these civil rights cases, they're very hard, and the government has the high ground. They have immunity, and you have to prove that they acted under the color of the law, meaning that they went beyond their power. So that's kind of where the color of the law comes in this scenario with the Fourth Amendment. Did they go beyond what the warrant said? And that I don't know, but I think that the city has the upper ground to say that, hey, yeah, we were just looking for squirrels and raccoons. And so I would say that it would be a hard case, but you never know. Maybe there's more stuff out there that could say that yes, there's a big civil rights issue. And the other issue, too, is yes, did you need 15 officers to come in and execute warrant on a squirrel and a raccoon? And so that's something that they would have to answer to. But again, you'd have to prove they were acting outside the color of the law. And so if you can prove that they were doing something else, if they were looking for other things, other crimes not related to having animals without a license, then circumstantial evidence says that maybe because they didn't just send in like 2 junior officers, they did send in a whole pack, and so if you can prove that, and one question is, well, why did you guys send so many people? Why did you send in why did you take all these resources to spend on a raccoon and squirrel? And so that's a big question that the city of New York or county, whatever county it was, would have to answer to on why the big barrage. And if they can't give a really good straight answer on why so many people had to come in, then that could be a valid claim to say that, yeah, there's maybe a scope Fourth Amendment violation here. But then the question is, what could this guy recover under a civil rights lawsuit? And because if he didn't have a valid license to the squirrel anyway, could he claim lost revenue for the death of the squirrel? Because I think even though the scope went beyond what it should have been, they still had the right to euthanize the squirrel. And so it may be hard to claim that you had lost revenue. I don't think he probably should recover lost revenue because of that. And also, he could maybe make a claim for some emotional distress if it was too crazy, and if it should have just been a more watered down junior officer, maybe there could be a claim for some emotional distress there. And therapy and how it's going to affect him moving forward and whatnot. But I think that making a claim that, hey, I lost all this revenue would be a tough sell as far as damages. Anyway, that's it. And then for me, when it comes to squirrels, Fourth Amendment, Brian Jackson, thanks for listening. Like and subscribe to hear more about real world and how it applies to the law. Thanks.